The Moro Rebellion 1899–1913 was an armed conflict between the Moro people and the United States military during the Philippine–American War. The word Moro is a term for Muslim people who lived in the southern Philippines, an area that includes Mindanao, Jolo and the neighboring Sulu archipelago. Background. The Moros have a 400-year history of resisting foreign rule. The violent armed struggle against the Filipinos, Americans, Japanese and Spanish is considered by current Moro Muslim leaders as part of the 4 centuries-long national liberation movement of the Bangsamoro Moro nation. The 400-year-long resistance against the Japanese, Americans, and Spanish by the Moros Muslims persisted and developed into their current war for independence against the Philippine state. A culture of jihad emerged among the Moros due to the centuries-long war against the Spanish invaders. The United States claimed the territories of the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. The ethnic Moro Muslim population of the southern Philippines resisted both Spanish and United States colonization. The Spaniards were restricted to a handful of coastal garrisons or forts, and they made occasional punitive expeditions into the vast interior regions. After a series of unsuccessful attempts during the centuries of Spanish rule in the Philippines, Spanish forces occupied the abandoned city of Jolo, Sulu, the seat of the Sultan of Sulu, in 1876. The Spaniards and the Sultan of Sulu signed the Spanish Treaty of Peace on July 22, 1878. Control of the Sulu archipelago outside of the Spanish garrisons was handed to the Sultan. The treaty had translation errors. According to the Spanish-language version, Spain had complete sovereignty over the Sulu archipelago, while the Tausug version described a protectorate instead of an outright dependency. Despite the very nominal claim to the Moro territories, Spain ceded them to the United States in the Treaty of Paris, which signaled the end of the Spanish-American War. Following the American occupation of the northern Philippines during 1899, Spanish forces in the southern Philippines were abolished, and they retreated to the garrisons at Zamboanga and Jolo. American forces took control over the Spanish government in Jolo on May 18, 1899, and at Zamboanga in December 1899. The Moros resisted the new American colonizers as they had resisted the Spanish. The Spanish, American, and Philippine governments have all been fought against by the Muslims of Sulu and Mindanao. Ottoman Empire's role. John Hay, the American Secretary of State, asked the ambassador to Ottoman Empire, Oscar Strauss in 1899 to approach Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid II to request that the Sultan write a letter to the Moro Sulu Muslims of the Sulu Sultanate in the Philippines telling them to submit to American suzerainty and American military rule. Despite the Sultan's pan-Islamic ideology, he readily aided the American forces because he felt no need to cause hostilities between the West and Muslims. Abdul Hamid wrote the letter, which was sent to Mecca, where 2 Sulu chiefs brought it home to Sulu. It was successful, and the Sulu Mohammedans refused to join the insurrectionists and had placed themselves under the control of the American army, thereby recognizing American sovereignty. John P. Finley wrote that, after due consideration of these facts, the Sultan, as Caliph, caused a message to be sent to the Mohammedans of the Philippine Islands forbidding them to enter into any hostilities against the Americans, inasmuch as no interference with their religion would be allowed under American rule. As the Moros have never asked more than that, it is not surprising that they refused all overtures made, by Aguinaldo's agents, at the time of the Filipino insurrection. President McKinley sent a personal letter of thanks to Mr. Strauss for the excellent work he had done, and said, its accomplishment had saved the United States at least 20,000 troops in the field. If the reader will pause to consider what this means in men and also the millions in money, he will appreciate this wonderful piece of diplomacy. In averting a holy war, President McKinley did not mention the Ottoman Empire. S. role in the pacification of the Sulu Moros in his address to the first session of the 56th Congress in December 1899, since the agreement with the Sultan of Sulu was not submitted to the Senate until December 18. Cause of the war. After the American government informed the Moros that they would continue the old protectorate relationship that they had with Spain, the Moro Sulu Sultan rejected this and demanded that a new treaty be negotiated. The United States signed the Bates Treaty with the Moro Sulu Sultanate, which guaranteed the Sultanate's autonomy in its internal affairs and governance, including Article 10 that guaranteed preservation of slavery, while America dealt with its foreign relations, in order to keep the Moros out of the Philippine-American War. Once the Americans subdued the northern Filipinos, the Bates Treaty with the Moros was adjusted by the Americans through removal of Article 10 and they invaded Moroland. After the war in 1915, the Americans imposed the Carpenter Treaty on Sulu. Philippine-American War events. First Republic forces in the southern Philippines were commanded by General Nicolas Capistrano, and American forces conducted an expedition against him in the winter of 1900–1901. On March 27, 1901, Capistrano surrendered. A few days later, General Emilio Aguinaldo was captured in Luzon. This major victory in the war in the north allowed the Americans to devote more resources to the south, and they began to push into the interior of Bangsamoro. On August 31, 1901, Brig. General George Whitefield Davis replaced Kobe as the commander of the Department of Mindanao Jolo. Davis adopted a conciliatory policy towards the Moros. American forces under his command had standing orders to buy Moro produce when possible and to have heralds of amity precede all scouting expeditions. Peaceful Moros would not be disarmed. Polite reminders of America's anti-slavery policy were allowed. One of Davis's subordinates, Captain John J. Pershing, assigned to the American garrison at Iligan, set out to better relations with the Moros of the Maranao tribes on the northern shore of Lake Lanao. He successfully established friendly relations with Amay Manabiling, the retired Sultan of Madaya. Although retired, Manabiling was the single most influential personage among the fragmented inhabitants of the northern shore of the lake. His alliance did much to secure American standing in the area. Conflict. Not all of Davis' subordinates were as diplomatic as Pershing. Many veterans of the Indian Wars took the "only good Indian is a dead Indian" mentality with them to the Philippines, and "civilize M with a crag" became a similar catchphrase. 3 ambushes of American troops by Moros, one of which involved juramentados, occurred to the south of Lake Lanao, outside of Manabalang's sphere of influence. These events prompted Maj. Gen. Adna R. Chaffee, the military governor of the Philippines, to issue a declaration on April 13, 1902, demanding that the offending Datu hand over the killers of American troops and stolen government property. Not compliant, a punitive expedition under Col. Frank Baldwin set out to settle matters with the South Shore Moros. Although an excellent officer, Baldwin was eager, and a worried Davis joined the expedition as an observer. On May 2, 1902, Baldwin's expedition attacked a Moro kata fortress at the Battle of Pandapadan, also known as the Battle of Bayan. Pandapadan's defenses were unexpectedly strong, leading to 18 American casualties during the fighting. On the second day, the Americans used ladders and moat-bridging tools to break through the Moro fortifications, and a general slaughter of the Moro defenders followed. The expeditionary force built at Camp Vickers 1 mile south of Pandapadan, and Davis assigned Pershing to Baldwin's command as an intelligence officer and as director of Moro affairs. As director, Black Jack Pershing had a veto over Baldwin's movements, which was an unstable arrangement. This arrangement was tested when survivors of Pandapadan began building a kata at Bacolod. Baldwin wanted to move on the hostile Moros immediately, but Pershing warned that doing so could create an anti-American coalition of the surrounding Datus, while some patient diplomacy could establish friendly relations with most of the Moros, isolating the hostile minority. Baldwin grudgingly agreed. On June 30, Pershing assumed command of Camp Vickers, and Baldwin returned to Malabang. A command the size of Camp Vickers would normally have gone to an officer with the rank of major, and a careful shuffling of personnel would be required to ensure that reinforcements to the camp did not include officers that were senior to Pershing. On July 4, 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt issued a proclamation declaring an end to the Philippine insurrection and a cessation of hostilities in the Philippines, except in the country inhabited by the Moro tribes, to which this proclamation does not apply. Later that month, Davis was promoted and replaced Chaffee as the Supreme Commander of American forces in the Philippines. Command of the Mindanao Jolo Department went to Brig. General Samuel S. Sumner. Meanwhile, Pershing settled down to conduct diplomacy with the surrounding Moros, and a July 4 celebration had 700 guests from neighboring rancherias. In September 1902, he led the Mesu expedition, which resulted in a victory that did much to establish American dominance in the area. On February 10, 1903, Pershing was declared a datu by the formerly hostile Pandita Sajidushaman of the Bayan Moros, who had been defeated at the Battle of Pandipatan, the only American to be so honored. Pershing's career at Camp Vickers culminated in the march around Lake Lanao during April and May 1903. Dansalan, also known as the Marawi Expedition, it included the Battle of Bacolod and First Battle of Taraca but was otherwise peaceful. This expedition quickly became a symbol of American control of the Lake Lanao region and was regarded with dismay by the Moro Maranao inhabitants of that region. While Pershing was working to the south of Lake Lanao, Major Robert Lee Bullard was working to the north, building a road from Iligan to Marawi. Although never officially declared one, like Pershing, he was regarded as a datu by the Moros. Because of the Lake Lanao Moros' very personalistic style of leadership, they had trouble seeing them as two officers in the same army. Instead, they saw them as two powerful chieftains who might become rivals. During Pershing's march around Lake Lanao, one Moro ran to Bullard, exclaiming that Pershing had gone juramentado, meaning berserk, and that Bullard had better run up the white flag, signaling that they had no quarrel with Pershing's troops. Bullard was unable to explain to the Moro why he was not worried about Pershing's approach. On another occasion, a powerful datu proposed an alliance with Bullard, for the purposes of defeating Pershing and establishing overlordship over the entire Lake Lanao region. On June 1, 1903, the Moro Province was created, which included all of the territory of the Philippines lying south of the 8th parallel of latitude, excepting the island of Palawan and the eastern portion of the northwest peninsula of Mindanao. The province had a civil government, but many civil service positions, including the district governors and their deputies, were held by members of the American military. The governor of the province served as the commander of the Department of Mindanao Jolo. This system of combined civil and military administration had several motivations behind it. One was the continued Moro hostilities. Another was the Army's experience during the Indian Wars, when it came into conflict with the Civilian Bureau of Indian Affairs. A third was that the Moros, with their feudal, personalistic style of government, would have no respect for a military leader who submitted to the authority of a non-combatant. In addition to the executive branch, under the governor, the province also had a legislative branch, the Moro Council. This council consisted of the governor, a state attorney, a secretary, a treasurer, a superintendent of schools, and an engineer. Although the governor appointed all of the other members of the council, this body was permanent, and provided a more solid foundation for laws than the fiats of the governor, which might be overturned by his successor. The province was divided into 5 districts, with American officers serving as district governors and deputy governors. These districts included, Cotabato, Davao, Lanao, Sulu, and Zamboanga. The districts were subdivided into tribal wards, with major datus serving as ward chiefs and minor datus serving as deputies, judges, and sheriffs. This system took advantage of the existing structure of Moro political society, which was based on personal ties, while paving the way for a more individualistic society, where the office, not the person holding it, would be given respect. On August 6, 1903, Major General Leonard Wood assumed his position as the governor of Moro Province and commander of the Department of Mindanao Jolo. Wood was somewhat heavy-handed in his dealing with the Moros, being personally offended by the Moro propensity for blood feuds, polygamy, and human trafficking, and with his ethnocentrism sometimes leading him to impose American concepts too quickly in Moroland. In addition to his views of the Moros, Wood also faced an uphill Senate battle over his appointment to the rank of Major General, which was finally confirmed on March 19, 1904. This drove him to seek military laurels in order to shore up his lack of field experience, sometimes leading the provincial army on punitive expeditions over minor incidents that would have been better handled diplomatically by the district governors. The period of Wood's governorship had the hardest and bloodiest fighting of America's occupation of Moroland. Some of the Moros fighting against the American troops were women who dressed exactly the same as men. This led to the song sung by American troops called, "If a Lady's Wearin' Pantaloons." Province under Leonard Wood, 1903 to 1906. Wood instituted many changes during his tenure as governor of Moro Province. On Wood's recommendation, the United States unilaterally abrogated the Bates Treaty, citing continuing piracy and attacks on American personnel. The Sultan of Sulu was demoted to a purely religious office, with no more power than any other datu, and was provided with a small salary. The United States assumed direct control over Moroland. Slavery was abolished. Slave trading and raiding were repressed, but slaves were left with their owners. Wood announced that slaves were at liberty to go and build homes for themselves wherever they liked, and pledged the military's protection for any former slaves that did so. Similar actions had been taken by individual commanders in the past, but Wood's edict had the backing of the Moro Council, giving it more permanent weight. The Cedula Act of 1903 created an annual registration poll tax. This registration poll tax was highly unpopular with the Moros, since they interpreted it as a form of tribute. According to Hurley, participation in the cedula was very low as late as 1933. The legal code of Moroland was reformed. Disputes between Moros and non-Christians had been left to Moro laws and customs, with Philippine laws only applying to disputes with Christians. This led to a double standard, with a Moro who killed a Christian facing a stiff prison sentence, but with a Moro who killed another Moro facing only a maximum fine of 150 pesos. Wood attempted to codify Moro law, but there was simply too much variance in laws and customs between the different tribes and even between neighboring katas. Wood placed the Moros underneath the Philippine Criminal Code, but actual enforcement of this proved difficult. Private land ownership was introduced, in order to help the Moros transition to a more individualistic society from their traditional tribal society. Each family was given 40 acres 16 hectares of land, with datus given additional land in accordance with their status. Land sales had to be approved by the district governments in order to prevent fraud. An educational system was established. By June 1904, there were 50 schools with an average enrollment of 30 students each. Because of difficulties in getting teachers that spoke native languages, classes were conducted in English after initial training in that language. Many Moros were suspicious of the schools, but some offered buildings for use as schools. Trade was encouraged in order to give the Moros an alternative to fighting. Trade had been discouraged by banditry, piracy, and the possibility of inter-tribal disputes between Moro merchants and local customers. When trading with foreign merchants, usually maritime Chinese, a lack of warehousing made for a buyer's market, leading to low prices. Wood handled banditry and piracy by establishing military posts at river mouths in order to protect sea and land routes. Starting with a pilot project in Zamboanga, a system of Moro exchanges was established. These exchanges provided Moro traders with warehouses and temporary housing in exchange for honoring a ban on fighting within the exchange. Bulletin boards listed market prices in Hong Kong and Singapore, and the district governments guaranteed fair prices. These exchanges proved highly successful and profitable, and provided a neutral ground for feuding datus to settle their differences. Campaigns. Major military campaigns during Wood's governorship include Wood's march around Lake Lanao during the fall of 1903 was an abortive attempt to replicate Pershing's earlier march. In October and November 1903, Wood personally led the provincial army to put down the Hassan Uprising, which was led by the most powerful Datu on the island of Jolo. In the spring of 1904, Wood destroyed or captured 130 Khatas during the Second Battle of Taraka. Beginning in the spring of 1904 and continuing into the fall of 1905, American forces conducted a lengthy and massive manhunt for Datu Ali, the overlord of Cotabato Valley. Datu Ali had rebelled over Wood's anti-slavery policy. Engagements during this campaign include the Battle of Siranaya, the Simpaydan Massacre, and the Battle of the Malalag River. The First Battle of Bud Daho was fought from March 5 to March 7, 1906. An estimated 600 Muslims were killed, fighting a force of 800 Americans. The incident in the Philippines written by Mark Twain condemned the American massacre at Bud Daho.
Governorship of Tasker H. Bliss, 1906 to 1909.
On February 1, 1906, Major General Tasker H. Bliss replaced General Wood as the commander of the Department of Mindanao Jolo, and replaced him as governor of Moro Province sometime after the First Battle of Bud Daho. Bliss' tenure is regarded as a peace era, and Bliss launched no punitive expeditions during his term in office. However, this superficial peace came at the price of tolerating a certain amount of lawlessness. Constabulary forces in pursuit of Moro fugitives often found themselves forced to abandon their chase after the fugitives took refuge at their home Khatas. The constabulary forces were outnumbered, and a much larger and disruptive expedition would have been required to dislodge the fugitives from their hiding place. However, this period also demonstrated the success of new aggressive American tactics. According to Rear Admiral D.P. Mannix, who fought the Moros as a young lieutenant from 1907–1908, the Americans exploited Muslim taboos by wrapping dead Moros in pig's skin and stuffing their mouths with pork, thereby deterring the Moros from continuing with their suicide attacks.
Governorship of John J. Pershing, 1909–1913. On November 11, 1909, Brigadier General John J. Pershing assumed his duties as the third and final military governor of Moro Province. Reforms.
Pershing enacted the following reforms during his tenure as governor. In order to extend rule of law into the interior, Pershing stationed the Philippine Scouts in small detachments throughout the interior. This reduced crime and promoted agriculture and trade, at the cost of reduced military efficiency and troop training. The benefits of this reform outweighed the costs. The legal system was streamlined. Previously, trials had started with the Court of First Instance, which convened every 6 months, and appeals to the Supreme Court in Manila often took more than 1 year. Pershing expanded the jurisdiction of the local ward courts, which were presided over by the district governors and secretaries, to include most civil cases and all criminal cases except for capital offenses. The Court of First Instance became the court of last resort. This reform was popular with the Moros, since it was quick, simple, and resembled their traditional unification of executive and judicial powers. Pershing promised to donate government land for purposes of building Muslim houses of worship. Pershing recognized the practice of sakapi, indentured servitude in exchange for support and protection, as legitimate, but reaffirmed the government's opposition to involuntary slavery. Labor contract law was reformed in 1912. Defaults on contracts by workers or employers were no longer punishable unless there was intent to defraud or injure. Moros, unused to Western notions of work, were prone to absenteeism, which could lead to breach of contract suits. The economy of Moro Province continued to expand under Pershing. The three most important exports, hemp, copra, and lumber, increased 163% during his first 3 years, and Moros began to make bank deposits for the first time in their history. The Moro exchange system was retained and was supplemented by industrial trading stations. These stations operated in the interior, where merchants seldom went, and bought any non-perishable goods the Moros wished to sell. The stations also sold goods to the Moros at fair prices, preventing price gouging during famines. Tactics. Pershing wrote the following in his autobiography about the Juramentado. The Juramentado attacks were materially reduced in number by a practice the army had already adopted, one that the Mohammedans held in abhorrence. The bodies were publicly buried in the same grave with a dead pig. It was not pleasant to have to take such measures, but the prospect of going to hell instead of heaven sometimes deterred the would-be assassins. Though this treatment was inflicted on captured Juramentado, historians do not believe that Pershing was directly involved with such incidents, or that he personally gave such orders to his subordinates. Letters and memoirs from soldiers describing events similar to this do not have credible evidence of Pershing's having been personally involved. Similarly, the claim made in February 2016 by presidential candidate Donald Trump, and repeated by Trump as president in August 2017, that Pershing executed 49 Muslim terrorists with bullets dipped in pig's blood, then let the 50th go free to spread the word about the religious atrocity, has been repeatedly debunked by historians, who find no evidence that such an incident occurred, although there were atrocities committed by U.S. forces during the war. Surrender of arms. Law enforcement in the Moro province was difficult. Outlaws would go to ground at their home katas, requiring an entire troop of police or soldiers to arrest them. There was always the danger of a full-fledged battle breaking out during such an arrest, and this led to many known outlaws going unpunished. In 1911, Pershing resolved to disarm the Moros. Army Chief of Staff Leonard Wood, former Moro Province governor, disagreed with this plan, stating that the move was ill-timed and that the Moros would hide their best arms, turning in only their worst. Pershing waited until roads into the interior had been completed, so that government troops could protect disarmed Moros from holdouts. He conferred with the Datus, who mostly agreed that disarmament would be a good idea, provided that everybody disarmed. 6 weeks before putting his disarmament plan into action, Pershing informed Governor-General William Cameron Forbes, who agreed with the plan. Pershing did not consult or inform his commanding officer, Major Gen. J. Franklin Bell. On September 8, 1911, Executive Order No. 24, which ordered the disarmament, was issued. The deadline for disarmament was December 1, 1911. Resistance to disarmament was particularly fierce in the district of Jolo and led to the Second Battle of Bud Daho, which, while involving roughly equivalent forces as the First Battle, was far less bloody, causing only 12 Moro casualties, and the Battle of Bud Bagzik. Transition to civil authority. By 1913, Pershing agreed that the Moro province needed to transition to civil government. This was prompted by the Moros' personalistic approach to government, which was based on personal ties rather than a respect for an abstract office. To the Moros, a change of administration meant not just a change in leadership but a change in regime, and was a traumatic experience. Rotation within the military meant that each military governor could serve only for a limited time. Civil governors were needed in order to provide for a lengthy tenure in office. Until 1911, every district governor and secretary had been a military officer. By November 1913, only one officer still held a civil office, Pershing himself. In December 1913, Pershing was replaced as governor of Moro Province by a civilian, Frank Carpenter. Casualties. During the Moro Rebellion, the Americans suffered losses amounting to 130 killed and 323 wounded. Another 500 or so died of disease. The Philippine scouts who augmented American forces during the campaign suffered 116 killed and 189 wounded. The Philippine constabulary suffered heavily as well, with more than 1,500 losses sustained, of which half were fatalities. On the Moro side, casualties were high as surrender was uncommon when Moros were engaged in combat. Juramentados and stopping power. In the Moro Rebellion, Moro Muslim juramentados in suicide attacks continued to charge against American soldiers even after being shot. Panglima Hassan in the Hassan Uprising was shot dozens of times before he went down. As a result, Americans elected to phase out revolvers with .38 caliber ammunition in favor of Colt .45 revolvers to continue their fight against the Moros. Arrows, bayonets, guns, and kris were used in often suicidal attacks by the Moros during their war with the Americans. Suicide attacks became more popular among Moros due to the overwhelming firepower of the Americans in conventional battles. Moro women took part in the resistance at the Battle of Bud Dajo against the American General Leonard Wood in 1906. Barbed wire proved to be of no impediment since Moro juramentado warriors managed to surge directly through it even as it ripped at their flesh and even as they were shot repeatedly with bullets. The Moros used barongs to inflict injuries upon American soldiers. Moros under Jickery managed to survive in a cave under machine gun fire and Colt gunfire. Kris and Campilan were used by Moros in fierce close-quarter combat against the Americans. Muskets were also used by the Moro. The Moro employed bayonets at close range when shooting was not possible according to the American journal The Field Artillery Journal, Volume 32. Americans were even charged at by Moros using spears. Moros fought to the death against Americans armed with rifles and artillery while they themselves used only kris at the Crater Battle. Novels have been written about juramentados deliberately impaling themselves on their bayonets in order to reach and kill American soldiers. In popular culture, Vic Hurley's History of the Moros. Swish of the Kris. The Story of the Moros tells the story of Col. Alexander Rogers using pigs to subdue the Moros in the Philippines. Hurley wrote that Col. Rogers was known as the pig to the Moros. And another Hurley book, The Jungle Patrol, The Story of the Philippine Constabulary, also relates the story of pigs being used against them. Hurley wrote the screenplay for the Hollywood film The Real Glory in 1937. The film was released in 1939. It was based on a 1937 novel of the same name by Charles L. Clifford, a pen name of Hurley's. There is a scene in the movie where Gary Cooper as Dr. Bill Canavan drapes a captured Muslim in a pigskin. He proclaims that all slain Muslim rebels will be buried in pig skins to prevent their entry into paradise. The Hollywood film served as propaganda for the Americans, portraying the American forces as brave defenders of the local population being terrorized by the Moros. See also Moros during World War II. Spanish Moro Wars. Moro insurgency in the Philippines. M1911 References. Notes. Bibliography. Arnold, James R. 2011. The Moro War, How America Battled a Muslim Insurgency in the Philippine Jungle, 1902–1913. Bloomsbury Press. ISBN 9781608190249. OCLC 664519655. Bertle, Andrew J. 1998. U.S. Army Counterinsurgency and Contingency Operations Doctrine, 1860–1941. Diane Pub Co. ISBN 0-7881-7327-8. Byler, Charles. May to June 2005. Pacifying the Moros, American Military Government in the Southern Philippines, 1899–1913, PDF. Military Review, 41–45. Retrieved 2 December 2007. Hagedorn, Herman 1931. Leonard Wood, A Biography, 2. New York, Harper & Brothers. Hurley, Vic 1936. Swish of the Kris. New York, E. P. Dutton & Co. Archived from the original on 12 July 2008. Retrieved 2 December 2007. Co. Maj. The Bates Treaty. PhilippineUpdate.com. Retrieved 2 December 2007. Kolb, Richard K. May 2002. Like a Mad Tiger, Fighting Islamic Warriors in the Philippines 100 Years Ago. BFW Magazine. Lane, Jack C. 1978. Armed Progressive, General Leonard Wood. San Rafael, Caliph, Presidio Press. ISBN 0-89141-009-0. OCLC 3415456. Millett, Alan R. 1975. The General, Robert L. Bullard and Officership in the United States Army 1881–1925. Westport, Con, Greenwood Press. ISBN 0-8371-7957-2. OCLC 1530541. Palmer, Frederick 1970, 1934. Bliss, Peacemaker, The Life and Letters of General Tasker Howard Bliss. Freeport, NY, Books for Libraries Press. ISBN 0-8369-5535-8. OCLC 101067. Smythe, Donald 1973. Guerrilla Warrior, The Early Life of John J. Pershing. New York, Charles Scribner's Sons. ISBN 0-684-12933-7. OCLC 604954. Bendiver, Frank E. 1977. Black Jack, The Life and Times of John J. Pershing, 1. College Station, TX, Texas A&M University Press. ISBN 0-89096-024-0. OCLC 2645933. Further reading Lynn, Brian McAllister 1999. Guardians of Empire, The U.S. Army and the Pacific, 1902–1940. UNC Press Books. ISBN 978-0-8078-4815-9. External links. Battles of Bud Daho and Bud Bagzik. American Moro War history.